on Zoom could mute yourself so that we don't get any feedback, that would be helpful. If you want to jump in and say something, press the raised hand icon and I'll see it. Those of you in the room can just shout out like you normally do. Okay, so the question is, why was the temple destroyed? And I have a very famous Gemara in front of me, which many of you will be familiar with. And it is the story of Sinat Chinam. Okay, Sinat Chinam means
hatred for no reason.
Hatred for no reason. Okay, that's a good translation. Hatred for no reason. I was always a baseless hatred. Yeah, baseless hatred. Same thing. Okay, and I think Lionel said something. Groundless hatred. Okay. All right. Hatred seems to be the main thing here. Now, which Gemara have I got open? Kamsa and Bar Kamsa. Okay. Is everybody familiar with the story of Kamsa and Bar Kamsa?
Yeah.
Okay. Well, I'm going to tell you about it anyway, even if you're familiar with it. Because we're going to look at it from perhaps a slightly different angle. And I'm going to begin. Maybe I should put this on the screen. What do you think? Let's see if I can. I don't know if I can do this on this computer. Let me see if I can. I press that and I go to there. I might be able to put it on the screen. It is Gittin 55b. And if we go to that on Safari, I should have got this ready before. Apologies. Gittin 55b. Safari, there we go.
There wasn't really anybody that you could ask. Get any sort of
just loading up.
Tourist,
we got to translate that.
You had to ask the guard about
Right.
the bus.
It is towards the bottom.
It was adequate, but it wasn't complete in its facilities.
So the rabbis say, here we go. Right, here we go. Right, let me share the screen now with you folk at home. Share. Show the screen.
This off.
Right. Somebody give me, David Marks, you're the next down on mine. Can you see the screen? Give me a thumbs up if you can see it. Great. Okay. So the Zoomers can now see the screen. Right. Now, the Gemara says like this. Akamtsa ubar kamtsa charuv Yerushalayim. Because of Kamtsa and Bar Kamtsa, Jerusalem was destroyed. It then goes on to say something else, which gives another two cases, which we don't normally look at because we get waylaid into Kamtsa and Bar Kamtsa. Anybody know what other two cases the Gemara gives? David, do you know what the other two cases are? A broken wheel is one of them. Yeah. And a chicken. Says the Gemara, Atarnagola v'Tarnagolta charuv Tur Malka. There was a town called Tur Malka, and that was destroyed because of a chicken. Because of a chicken.
Yeah.
Because of a chicken. We'll explain that in a minute. And the third one it gives is Ashaka de Rispak Charuv Beitar. Beitar, the very famous city of Beitar, was destroyed because of a chariot of a woman. So I'm going to tell you briefly, I'm not going to go and read the Gemara word by word. I'm going to tell you briefly what happened with these two other cases before we go back to Kamsa and Bar Kamsa. So the first one, how come a chicken caused the destruction of Tor Malka. Now, the Gemara says about Tor Malka, this is just, I'm telling you this just to demonstrate that you cannot rely on the numbers that you read in Chazal, okay? According to the Gemara, the city of Tor Malka had so many people in it that 300,000 armed soldiers came to Tor Malka and went around killing for 3 days and 3 nights. And meanwhile, a festive party was held on the other side of the city and nobody knew what was going on. Says the Gemara, King Yanai, Alexander Janus, had 600,000 towns in Tor Malka, and each one of them had 600,000 people. I mean, no. But I'm only telling you that because when somebody says, well, it says that in the Gemara, so it must be true, it isn't true. Because there was no, what's 600,000 times 600,000? Oh, well, anyway, there weren't that many people. It was a big place, but it got destroyed because of a chicken. The custom in Tor Malka was to present chickens and hens to the bride and groom, symbolizing their fertility. That was the thing to do. One time, Roman soldiers came through and seized this chicken and the hen, and the people got all upset and attacked the Roman soldiers. They went back and got their mates, came back with their 300,000 soldiers, or a lot of them anyway, and killed a lot of people. So the city was destroyed because of a chicken. That's what the Gemara says. The next one was because of a lady's chariot. There was another place called Beitar, who you've probably heard of, and that the custom there was when a child was born, when a boy was born, a cedar was planted. And when a girl was born, a pine was planted. And when they got married, each of these children, they used the wood from this tree for the chuppah. Beautiful custom, no? Anyway, turned out that one time somebody came along and one of the Romans came along and uprooted one of these trees, a cedar tree. The people got all upset about it, attacked the soldiers. They went back, got their friends, and destroyed Beitar. So the Gemara says, for those on those 3 things, because of a chicken and a hen, Tor Malka was destroyed. Because of a piece of wood on a chariot. Oh, that's why did they need the piece of wood? Because the empress's chariot or the governess's chariot broke down and it needed a piece of wood to repair it. So that's why they took the wood. So because of this broken down chariot, the whole of Beitar was destroyed. So there is a concept here. There's a pasuk in Mishlei, in Proverbs, that says, happy is the man who is always anxious. That sounds a bit weird, doesn't it? Happy is the man who is always anxious, but he who hardens his heart falls into misfortune. So it's a good thing to be anxious, according to, I'm going on because I've only got a short period of time. So what it means by this is you need to be anxious about what the consequences will be of your actions. So when they took the chicken and the hen from this Choson and Kala in Tor Malka, the Kanaim, the zealots there that jumped on the soldiers, if they'd have been anxious about what their consequences of their actions might have been, they might have realized that we are actually here under Roman rule. If we start with these few Roman soldiers over a bit of a chicken and an egg, it's not entirely unpredictable that they're going to go back, bring their friends, and destroy the city. So that was an example of not being roe et hanolad, not being somebody who saw the future, who saw the consequences of their actions. Pirkei Avot says, Ezeu chacham haroe et hanolad. Who's a wise person? Somebody who sees the consequences of their actions. Same with the city of Beitar. So they took a cedar tree and she fixed her chariot with it. Big deal. Okay, wasn't a nice thing to do, but the Romans are in charge here. It's not entirely unpredictable that they would go away and cause trouble, come back and cause trouble. They didn't think of their actions. Now, that's not quite the story with Kamsa and Bar Kamsa. let's have a look at this, exactly what the Gemara says. Akamtza ubar kamtza charuv Yerushalayim. Because of Kamtza and Bar Kamtza, Yerushalayim was destroyed. We'll briefly say the story. Most of you know the story, but briefly say the story. There was a fellow in town who made a party. It was a private party. Not everybody was invited. He sent his shamus to go and invite Kamtza. His friend Kamtza was invited to this party. The Shmerel went and invited somebody with a similar name called Bar Kamtza, who happened to be the enemy of the party maker of the Baal Simcha, whatever it was. And Bar Kamtza thinks, well, that's nice. We've buried the hatchet. He's invited me. I'll come. He comes to the party. The Balabos there says, what are you doing here? I hate you. Get out of here. He says, I don't want you at my party. You're not invited. The guy said, please don't embarrass me in front of everybody here. I'll pay for whatever I'll eat. Just don't chuck me out. So, nah, get out of here. Not interested. He goes on and he says, I'll pay for half the whole of the party. Just don't embarrass me in front of everybody. He says, no, I'm not interested. He then offers to pay for the whole thing. Not interested. And he gets thrown out. Bar Kamtza gets thrown out. Bar Kamtza then says, what kind of way is that to behave? That's a terrible thing to do. And more than that, who was at the party? All the Rabbanim, all the big knackers who sat there, no doubt, like nodding dogs, like this, yeah. And they did not object to the way I was treated. So that must mean that they agreed with how I was treated. And we bring from here a concept which has entered into the lexicon. Silence is acquiescence. In Hebrew or in Aramaic, shtika kahoda'a domye. Shtika kahoda'a domye. Silence is like assent. Silence is acquiescence. The rabbis didn't object to this terrible behavior that Bar Kamtza got thrown out. So he got the needle, Bar Kamtza got the needle with the rabbis and said, I'll get my own back on that. That's a good question. I'm going to come back to that question in a moment. Very good, Lionel. They wouldn't have heard you on the Zoom. The question that Lionel just asked is, what did Kamtza do wrong? We're coming to Kamtza in a moment. So Bar Kamtza then gets it in his head that he is going to get his own back on these rabbis who acquiesced to his being treated in such a terrible way. And he goes to the Roman leaders there and he says, you know what, these Jews, they're very elitist. They won't have anything to do with anything of you Roman people. They think they're a cut above everybody else. I bet you, he says, if you send an animal down to their temple to be sacrificed to their god, I bet you they won't accept it. And the Roman says, right, well, we'll try it out. Sends the most beautiful animal. And on the way, Bar Kamtza makes a little nick. There's a machlokas whether it was in the eye or the lip. But either way, he made a little nick, which rendered the animal unfit to be offered on the Mizbeach. It still looked like a beautiful animal. The Romans wouldn't have said that there was anything wrong with this, but al pi halacha, it wasn't allowed to be offered up. So then they have a whole debate about what they're going to do. And somebody says, well, we really ought to offer this up because if we don't, he's going to get upset and then he's going to come and destroy Jerusalem. And then somebody says, a very famous person says, we'll come back to him in a minute. He says, no, you can't do that because if you do that, people will think that it's okay to offer up blemished animals. So then they have another think and think, oh, well, maybe we'll kill Bar Kamtza, right? And then he won't be able to report back about what's happened. And so this same rabbi says, no, can't do that because then people will think that making a blemish in an animal is a capital offense and you get killed for it. And that's not true. So what did they do? They didn't do anything. They didn't offer it up. And word got back to the Romans. Romans came along and said, and Bar Kamtza said, see, I told you, these people don't have anything to do with you. They're elitists. They need to gather good schmeissing. And then Jerusalem was destroyed. So that's the story in the Gemara. Now, it's clear that there are various people here that are at fault. The truth is, of course, Jerusalem would have been destroyed Anyway, whether it was a story of Kamsa and Bar Kamsa had not happened or not happened, that was not the only issue that caused it. We know from all the translations that we've had of Sinat Chinam, baseless hatred, groundless hatred. What did you say, David? Hatred without cause. The people at the time were a totally fragmented people. We were split into all sorts of sects. We had the Perushim, the Pharisees, who were the main people's party. We had the Sadukim, Mervin's lot, the Kohanim, the elitist Kohanim who took their power from the Beit HaMikdash, and they were sucking up to the rich people. Then there were the Essenes, the Isim. They were a very pure and celibate sort of people. That was they believed in jumping in and out of the mikveh all day long because of purity. Huh? It is said that possibly Jesus was part of the Essenes, and the Dead Sea Scrolls tell us all about the Essenes. That was the Dead Sea Scrolls was from an Essene group. Obviously, they weren't going to do very well because they practiced celibacy. That isn't a great way to, to go forward. But there was all sorts of groups. There were the Christians. There was all sorts going on there. The Jewish people were completely fragmented and fighting one another for no apparent reason. Hatred without cause, groundless hatred. So the story of Kamsa and Bar Kamsa is really only a peg to hang on this idea of groundless hatred. But Lionel's question is a very good question. And that's, what did Kamsa do wrong? But let's see what everybody else did wrong first. Bar Kamsa, obviously, he went over to the Romans and managed to get to actually wind them up in order to attack, to make a particular attack. Clear what he did wrong. The rabbis, poor leadership, weak leadership, leadership that did not stand up and say to the Baal Simcha, hang on a minute, that's not the way to behave. You can't do that to another person. Shaming a person in public is like murder. Shaming a person in public isn't murder. We had it in last week's Pirkei Avot share, didn't we? Somebody who shames another person in public loses his olam haba. It's the most terrible thing to do. And there were these rabbis, and they didn't say anything. What kind of leadership is that? Very poor leadership. So that was clearly at fault there, the leader. But what about Kamsa? So what did Kamsa do wrong? Any suggestions? What did Kamsa do wrong? Well, he didn't do anything wrong, did he really? Because he wasn't even there, because he didn't get the invitation. But the problem was, go back one step. What was this party all about? This party was a private, cliquey party that was only available to certain people, elitist, and what were the rabbis doing being part of this elitist clique? Kamsa was, if you like, symptomatic of the society that was going on there, which was part of this elitist club, part of a club that says, I'll have you, but I won't have you. You're in and you're out. Not only are you in and you're out, you're very much in and you are very much out. So much so that I don't even care if you pay for the whole thing, you're out. So that kind of group of people. So although Kamsa himself didn't do anything wrong, when the Gemara says that because of Kamsa and Bar Kamsa, the temple was destroyed, it's talking about the concept of people not broadening their horizons to accept everybody. What would have happened in a situation where you've got the Romans attacking towards the end of the time before the destruction of the temple? We had in 63, 7 years before the destruction of the temple, in the north, in the Galil, you had the Battle of Yodfat, which was a very bloody battle. And then the Romans, that was the last sort of a vestige of defense at that time before the Romans swept through the country and came to siege Jerusalem. We know today being Shiva Asar Tammuz was the day that the walls were breached in the siege. So what would have happened when we have this siege on if we'd have all come together as a people? What happened on the 7th of October when the walls were breached? Those walls were breached on 7th of October. I was talking to Tanya White earlier today. I don't know if any of you know Tanya White. She's a wonderful teacher of Torah and Sachs scholar. She's part of the Rabbi Sachs legacy as well now. And we were discussing this idea of this breaching of the walls. And she said something that really hit home to me. She said, you know, we all talk about Shiva Asar Tammuz, and it's the day the walls were breached, and we've got this 3 weeks that we're a bit semi-mourning, and then we come to Tisha B'Av and we sit on the floor. And really, until this year, these were her words, and I have to say, I absolutely relate to them. She says, I now feel that I was faking it to a degree. I was faking it. I'm sitting there crying, and there we are. I'm going to leave my crying day. I'm going to get up and I'm going to walk down, I'm going to have a quick look at the beautiful beach here, or, if you're in Yerushalayim, you're going to look at the beautiful stuff we've got there in Mamilla, and then you're going to go to the old city and you're going to see the beautiful Jewish quarter, and you're going to see all the Jewish kids there from Yeshiva and Sem in the Arava Square there, and you're going to say, well, not much to cry about here, is there? But this year, we know what it means to have the walls breached, don't we? After the 7th of October, when they breached those fences. We don't have to fake it anymore. And what happened then after the 7th of October is we all very much, at least temporarily, came together. All that nonsense that we were screaming and shouting about the judicial reforms, that all went away. And the families that were even speaking to one another, inside families, brothers and sisters, literal brothers and sisters, were not speaking to one another because one was for and one was against. And the hatred that had been expressed between one group and another, hatred really without any cause. Okay, you disagree about a piece of politics, but is that a reason to hate? Not a reason to hate. You can disagree. You can disagree vehemently. You can even disagree loudly. But you can't hate. That's not an emotion that can be constructive. It's not constructive.
No,
It's very destructive. That's right. I've mentioned this before, but I saw in the height of all that nonsense, when I was driving up north, there was one of the bridges, there was a sign that said, to disagree is mutar. Litvakeach mutar. Aval lisno asur. Achim anachnu. So disagree is permitted. To hate is forbidden. We are brothers. And that was before all this stuff. Suddenly, 7th of October, the walls are breached. We are facing a terrible threat. And all of those factions came together. Right? You had fighting the enemy, either at the front, supporting the troops, or the rest of us here doing all the volunteer work that we did, running up and down the country, collecting, buying, donating, volunteering, all of those things, that feeling of b'yachad nenatzeach. How many times have you seen that written up there? It's become a slogan. And at first it was a really meaningful slogan, but I'm afraid that it's beginning to fray at the edges a little bit. B'yachad nenatzeach, together we will win. It's the only way we can win. Imagine what might have happened in the situation at the time of the destruction of the temple if all the factions had come together and fought together, or at least had approached the scenario in a unified way. It might have been very different. It might have been very different. I spend most of my professional life applying what is called the but-for test. I work in the field of clinical negligence, or for the Americans, medical malpractice. And what in the UK, the law is that you have to apply the but-for test. So, but for the negligence, what would have happened? So, if the doctor had not cut off the wrong leg, right? But for that negligence, the fellow would still have 2 legs. No, he'd only have 1 leg because he would have still cut off the right leg. But he had no legs because he cut off the wrong leg, and then he had to cut off the other leg. So, but for the negligence, but for that problem of sinat chinam, we have to imagine what would have happened. Everybody would have said, look, I don't necessarily agree with your interpretation of the Torah. The Tzaddukim did not believe in Torah Shebaal Peh. They did not believe in the oral law. They believed in the written law. They didn't believe in Olam Haba. They didn't believe in the afterworld. Okay, these are interpretations. But Achim and Achim were brothers. Imagine if they had come together, the Perushim and the Tzaddukim, and said, you know what, we've got a common enemy. We need to come together. We'll put our differences on the side. When we've dealt with the enemy, we can come back to that. But right now, we need to present a united front. Now, the problem was that there were such a wide range of opinions like we have today. And this is the whole point of commemorating Shiva Asar Tammuz and Tisha B'Av and the 3 weeks. Like Tanya said, you can't fake it anymore because it's too real. You know, up until this year, we could sit there and we could cry and we could clap and vein and read the Kinot and say, wow, that was terrible. And then look at our watch and say only an hour to go before the end of the fast. But we can't do that today because we're right in it. And look at what's going on right now. The differences in opinions. I'm not going to ask you because then I don't want to have a discussion. But I bet if we were to go around this room, we'd have at least 5 or 6 different approaches to how the army should approach it, how the government should approach it, what we should do with the hostages, what we should do with the negotiations, what we should do with the Houthis. There will be all different opinions. Okay. Makes not one jot of difference what I think about what they should do. Because I'm not in a position of power to influence the decisions. I can do one thing as an individual in Klal Yisrael, and that is I can give my support to those who are trying their best to defeat the enemy, whether it is physically defeat the enemy, whether it is conceptually to defeat the enemy, whether it is through government agencies, through negotiations, through fighting. I can't do any of those. I'm not a soldier. I'm not a politician. I can't do any of those things. But I can give my support to the people who need that support. And it's not helpful for me to go and say to anybody else, well, I think that Bibi's doing a rubbish job. I think that Gallant's doing a rubbish job. I think the chief of staff's doing a rubbish job. If it was up to me, I would do X, Y, and Z. Well, it's not up to me. And it never will be up to me. And it's not helpful. It's only destructive, as Solly said. So for the going back to the time of the Beit HaMikdash, why was the destruction of the temple here? Because of Kamsa and Bar Kamsa? Not just because of the bad behavior of Bar Kamsa, not just because of the poor leadership shown by the rabbis, but also what Kamsa himself, not him personally, but what he represented. The fact that there were elitist groups, no doubt that if it had been at that party behind closed doors, there would have been criticism of the government, there would have been criticism of the leadership, there would have been everybody giving their 2 pennies of how it should have been done. Because that's the nature of those closed parties, isn't it? You go to one of these closed, what do they call it? Something rules, Chatham House rules. Yeah, you go to a Chatham House rules means that nothing can be reported from this meeting. It's a silent meeting. Nothing can be reported. And usually, if there's something that's not reported, it's usually because it's something that other people don't want other people to hear. And that's what that was the feeling going on at the time. But it was even worse than that, because you had a group of people who not only did they disagree with the main leadership of the people, numerically at least, were the Perushim, the Pharisees, who were led by Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai. Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai was the leader, and his policy was one of appeasement. His policy was, we cannot defeat the Romans physically. The best that we can do is to hope for survival under the rule of the Romans, bearing in mind that for the previous, 420, 500, the previous at least 900, 850 years, they hadn't been completely sovereign in the land. After the time of Shlomo HaMelech, when the kingdom split, it wasn't long after that till Nebuchadnezzar came from the north, from Bavel, and started to rule over the land. There was a period of time when, during the first temple, there was a vassal state where we were able to function as a people with a temple, semi-autonomously, but we didn't have total autonomy. There was the Babylonians, and then there were the Persians and the Medes. Okay, and we have the story of Purim after the exile, from the first exile by Nebuchadnezzar, 586, something like that, BCE. Then we had the time in Babylon, in Bavel, by the rivers of Babylon. We sat and wept. We've got the story of Purim, which took place in that time. We weren't in charge of there. We had to go kowtowing to Achashverosh. And then when we were allowed back to build the second temple, who allowed us back? Darius and Cyrus. Okay? Not our folk. We were given permission. There was a very short period of time when we had some kind of autonomy during the time of the Hashmonaim. A very short period of time, right? Less than 100 years before we messed it all up. And why did we mess it up then? Sinat Chinam, right? One brother killing another brother imprisoning a brother. Went all the way through. After the second generation of Hashmonaim was a disaster. They were brothers killing one another, factions here, factions there. The Queen Shlom Tzion, married one brother. He got killed. Married the other brother. He got killed. What's going on? Sinat Chinam. That was what was going on. That didn't last very long. Greeks came along. Story of Hanukkah, right? Were we in charge of the Beit HaMikdash? Very nice. We came and we rededicated the Beit HaMikdash, and we had a bit of oil and we lit the menorah. We still were under the rule of the Greeks. And then came the Romans. And then came the destruction of Israel and Jerusalem and the exile. So Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai's approach was an approach which had major precedent. It had enabled the survival of the Jewish people for the previous 850 years. Keep your head down. Do what you have to do to get the Romans off your back. Obviously, we want to try and keep the Torah as much as we possibly can, and they tell you can't do this and you can't do that. We'll do our best to keep it. But we don't want to stir up the hornet's nest. We don't want to do and this is why the same Gemara brings the story of Tor, Malka, and Beitar, because on the face of it, what's that got to do with Jerusalem? The face of it was, these were groups of people, Canaim, zealots, that didn't think of their actions. So the same thing happened at the time of the destruction. These zealots, who were known as various different things, they were known as Canaim, which means zealots. They were known as the Biryonim. They were Biryonim. They were that comes from the word for fire. That comes from the word, they were fiery people. And then there were the Sikri. Sikari. And what were they? Stabbers. Sikri means a dagger, because they went around killing anybody that didn't agree with them, right? Jew or Roman, didn't make any difference. They didn't agree with him. Stick a dagger in them. They were the super terrorists of the terrorists. The Biryonim, what did they do? It was all Jews, by the way. These were all Jews. What did the Biryonim do? That's why they got their name. There was enough food. Remember, the house warfare in those days was done by siege, right? When did the siege begin? Asara b'Tevet, the 10th of Tevet, previously. Okay, how was that? Tevet, Adar. Yeah, what's after Tevet? Adar, yeah? No, Shvat. Shvat, Adar, Nisan, Iyar, Sivan, Tammuz. 6 months. Okay, so the siege had been going 6 months, but they had plenty of food. They'd stockpiled it. They also had water because they had assistance from Yecheskel's wells. So they were not in a perilous situation. They could withstand that siege for a very long time. They could have withstood the siege, followed Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai's approach, come together as a people, negotiated with the Romans, relieve the siege. Romans say, okay, you've got to do what we say. You've got to bring us tribute. You've got to pay your taxes. You've got to behave yourself. You've got to stop having skirmishes with our soldiers. Just behave yourself. By the way, if you read Josephus, the War of the Jews, it tells you very clearly there that the Jews were a thorn in the Roman side. The Roman Empire stretched all the way to Britain, right? All the way through Europe and all the way through Britain. Julius Caesar was at one point the consul of Britain, right? And who does Josephus say were the most troublesome people?
The Gauls.
No, the Jews. Surprise, surprise. Yeah. Here it's the Belgians. The Jews were the most troublesome people. So if they'd have followed Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai's lead, if they'd have all come together behind the leader and said, look, I don't agree with your policy, but, this is the majority view. We'll come together. We'll support you. We'll go along with it. We could have survived. But for that, sinat chinam, we could have survived. But instead, they took drastic action. These Biryonim went and torched their own food. They torched the entire supplies of food, which meant what? That they couldn't survive the siege, which meant they had no choice but to fight for their lives. And then, of course, because they had no food, what did they do? Go and read the Kinot, what they had to do, right? Yes, Nina's making a right face there. I don't even want to say it, what they did. You can read it. There was terrible, terrible starvation. There didn't need to be that starvation. Those poor mothers who had to do what they did with their children didn't need to do that. There was plenty of food before they torched it. They even torched one tower. One tower in the guard tower, they torched that as well. They were willing to destroy the people for their own cause, and they were not willing to get behind the leader, put their differences aside. They could have achieved survival, Sully.
Why did they do that?
Oh, because they took their lead from the concept of Masada. Masada will never fall again. Meaning, we would rather commit suicide than survive under Roman rule.
The whole of the Roman world existed under Roman rule.
Correct.
And people understood that an oak in a high wind will break. A willow will bend.
Correct. But they didn't understand that. And it boils down to a saying which was taught to me by my old boss: you cannot reason with an unreasonable person. And these people were unreasonable. They were not logical. They were not stopping and thinking, we are doomed if we do this. We've got a chance if we get behind and we negotiate. It won't be perfect, but we could have avoided the complete destruction of the temple. We could have avoided the exile. Who knows what would have happened after if we'd have survived, got our head down under Roman rule. Maybe at some point or another, the Romans would have been defeated and things would have been different. As it was, we ended up with complete exile. We ended up with the destruction of the temple. We ended up with the Kalim of the Beit HaMikdash in the Vatican. We ended up with Titus's arch. We ended up with exile, and everybody here ended up in the countries where they ended up in before we made our way back here. All because of Sinat Chinam. Now, when I was a kid and I learned about Sinat Chinam in Cheder, I didn't really understand it. I just thought that meant, I don't like you, you're horrible, right? Because that's what you think as a kid. You know, baseless hatred means I hate you for no reason. And that people are just not nice to me. That's not what it really means. What it really means is that factions were hating one another instead of coming together, putting aside their political differences, putting aside their operational differences, and coming together as a people and saying, as a people together, let's deal with this beyachad nenatzeach. And the Gemara also says, Chazal say, any generation which does not merit to see the rebuilding of Jerusalem must still be guilty of the cause that made Jerusalem be destroyed. Think about that, right? Every generation since 70 CE has been guilty of Sinat Chinam. That's what that Chazal mean by that. And we're not learning our lessons. We're just not learning our lessons.
They're not right.
Huh?
They're not right.
Well, you know, history has proved that they are right. Okay, we've been given an absolute gift of this country. In 1948, you know, my own personal opinion, this is the time of Mashiach. This is what it means, what Mashiach means. Mashiach will not, my opinion, will not come riding in on a white donkey. He's not a person. Mashiach is a time. It's a time span. It's a time span when, as the Rambam says, various criteria for Mashiach. Kibbutz Galuyot, well, more, almost 50% of the Jews in the world have been returned to Israel. Israel will be under the rule of the Jews, which it is, and the rebuilding of the Beit HaMikdash, which we have not yet got. We might have had it though, mightn't we? We did miss a chance there. We're not going back on that. We spoke about that in Yom Yerushalayim. Perhaps we missed a chance there. But the fact is, this generation has got the biggest opportunity for 2,000 years. And yet, we've just had the biggest patch in Punim in the last 76 years on the 7th of October. Why? It's obvious. Why? Because of Sinat Chinam. And again, I come back, we'll just finish with this because it's time's up. We come back to it. Beyachad nenatzeach. That was written right after the 7th of October, and whoever first wrote it absolutely meant it. I'm 100% sure. And when we all first read it, or wrote it, or felt it, we really felt it. We felt that we were coming together. People did come together. It was phenomenal. But the cracks have started to appear again. And even in small communities, you've got people who are saying things which are upsetting to other people and not coming together. And why was the temple destroyed? I'm not telling you any secrets there. Sinat Chinam, it was caused. Why has it not been rebuilt? Same answer, Sinat Chinam. And we get rid of Sinat Chinam, we have a chance. Rabbi Hanani ben Akash Amar HaKadosh Baruch Hu leZakar Yisrael lefichach hiru v'hem torah v'shenema Adonai chafetz leman tzidko yagdil Torah v'yadir.